Before starting this video, I do want to give a thank you to my patrons that support the channel. And if you would like to support the channel, there are some great benefits for you in the link down below. So with that, let's get into today's video. Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin coming back at you with another video today on PubStomp MTG. Glad to have you here. So with this video, I wanted to make it a little bit more special because I wanted to make two different deck techs, one with the good guys and one with the bad guys, completely made up with Lord of the Rings cards only. I'm not talking about any other Magic cards outside of Lord of the Rings arts. So with these two specific decks that I made that are in the description down below, they are only made up of Lord of the Rings cards, whether they're reprints from the main set or even from the Commander decks. I try to make these decks as flavorful as possible for all of you so that you can enjoy the decks for yourself. So with these two deck options, I do have the good guys with Aragorn the Uniter, mainly because he has 4 color. We could add all the good guys we want into the deck. And the other deck I'm going to be showcasing is Sauron the Dark Lord, not the one that I made originally because that's a little bit more high powered. I add some cards from not Lord of the Rings universe, so of course this is going to be a completely in Lord of the Rings universe theme. So with that said, first I'm going to go over Aragorn the Uniter and some of the Lord of the Rings cards that are must includes. But first let's discuss Aragorn the Uniter and why he's the most optimal commander for our deck. So he does have a lot of different options in our arsenal whenever we're casting different colored spells. Whenever you cast a white spell, you create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. Whenever you cast a blue spell, you scry 2. Whenever you cast a red spell, Aragorn the Uniter deals 3 damage to target opponent. And whenever you cast a green spell, target creature gets +4/+4 until end of turn. So again, there's so much going on in this deck. We definitely want to have a multicolored theme mixed in with a legendary theme because of the amount of legendary creatures in the deck with all the Lord of the Rings characters. You could go 5 color with Tom Bombadil, but he's more of a saga commander. I feel like he has his own separate deck list that doesn't even use half the creatures or half the characters. So I thought Aragorn the Uniter would be the best option for the good guys. So when diving into this deck, I want to talk mainly about strategies and synergies you may want to follow when putting this deck together. So I thought of a couple cards like Gimli of the Glittering Caves, Legolas Greenleaf, and Gandalf Westward Voyager. So when discussing these cards, I absolutely love Gimli for the fact that it does have double strike, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you create a treasure token, essentially making 2 treasure tokens when you deal combat damage with Gimli. Also on top of that, I do like Legolas' ability of dealing combat damage and drawing a card. These both provide great value, especially when another legendary creature enters the battlefield. We get a 1/1 counter on them. I do like Gandalf Westward Voyager for the ability whenever you cast a spell with a mana value 5 or greater, each opponent reveals the top card of their library. If any of those share a card type with that spell, you copy that spell, you may choose new targets for the copy, and each opponent draws a card. Otherwise, you draw a card. So we do have a decent amount of 5-cost spells in the deck, so I think Gandalf will provide great value, especially either giving us a card draw or copying spells. I like this a lot for what it does. I did also want to share with you some other members of the Fellowship that will be perfect in the deck. They are multicolored like Boromir Gondor's Hope. This is absolutely incredible when it enters the battlefield or attacks. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a human or artifact card from among them and put them into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So this one is great because it has an overall great value engine whenever it attacks or enters the battlefield. We can get some card advantage. Plus, he has one of the most beautiful chops that I have ever seen on a person. I did also want to bring your attention to Merry and Pippin, the troublemaking hobbits. So Merry does have haste and have first strike as long as it's equipped. We do have a lot of equipments in this deck, so that's going to be a perfect include. Whenever you attack with Merry and another legendary creature, very fitting with Éowyn, you draw a card. So as you can see, Merry, Esquire of Rohan, is more of an aggressive type of strategy where you want to constantly be attacking so that you could draw some cards. Pippin is more about protecting your creatures, so he does have Vigilance and Ward 1. You can tap him another target creature you control gains protection from the card type of your choice until end of turn. Plus, these do have 2 different colors, so this is going to fit perfectly with Aragorn the Uniter. Also, of course, I did have to add Frodo and Samwise Gamgee. Creatures are going to be entering the battlefield left and right. Samwise Gamgee is going to be making food tokens for you. You could also sacrifice 3 food tokens, return target historic cards from your graveyard to your hand. So this has a great utilization so that you could get cards from your graveyard to your hand so that you could use those cards again. However, I do think Frodo is going to be an absolute great include in the deck, mainly because we do have a lot of equipments. Whenever he enters the battlefield or attacks, you may attach target equipment you control with mana value 2 or 3 to Frodo. As long as it's your turn, prevent all damage that would be dealt to Frodo. So if you notice in the deck list down below, there's going to be a lot of different equipments like Mithril Coat, Rings of Bahir. You also have Sting and Andril. There's a lot of legendary cards in the deck that you could put and equip to Frodo. So I do think with all the equipments in general, Frodo's going to put a lot of work in for you. I did also want to discuss with you Arwen. There's two different versions in the deck with Arwen Mortal Queen and Arwen Weaver of Hope. I like Arwen Mortal Queen because it's so flavorful. I thought I had to add into the deck. It enters the battlefield with an indestructible counter. You could also remove the indestructible counter from Arwen. Another target creature gains indestructible until end of turn. You put a 1/1 counter and a lifelink counter on that creature, and a +1/+1 counter and a lifelink counter on Arwen. So you could use her ability to save one of your creatures. Giving up her immortality to save another creature is absolutely flavorful. I also do think Arwen Weaver of Hope is absolutely going to be incredible with Aragorn the Uniter. Say for example, Arwen and Aragorn are on the battlefield at the same time. You cast a green creature spell. You could then give +4/+4 to Arwen Weaver of Hope because of Aragorn the Uniter's ability. So when that green creature enters the battlefield, instead of getting 1/1 counters on it, you're going to get 5/5 counters on that one green creature because of Arwen's ability and Aragorn the Uniter combined. And you know, it's actually kind of crazy how much Aragorn the Uniter synergizes with so much different cards. Say for example, we do have Galadriel of Lothlorien on the battlefield. So say for example, we play a blue spell, Aragorn the Uniter will scry 2 when you play that blue spell, and then whenever you do scry, you could reveal a top card of your library that's a land, and you could put it onto the battlefield. And you know the same thing could happen for Elrond, Master of Healing. Whenever you scry, you put a 1/1 counter on each up to X target creatures, where X is the number of cards looked at scrying this way. So if you are casting blue spells left and right, Aragorn the Uniter is going to be able to have you scry so much so that you can put 1/1 counters on a lot of different creatures because of Elrond's ability. And on top of that, whenever a creature you control with a 1/1 counter on it becomes the target of a spell or of an ability of opponent controls, you may draw a card. So if your opponents decide, hey, I'm going to try to remove a creature you control, hey, no, I get to draw a card on top of that. People don't like when you draw extra cards, so this is honestly a great include, but I do feel like Aragorn the Uniter is going to be pretty popular. Well, that's all I really wanted to discuss with Aragorn the Uniter. Some key synergy pieces in the deck. I do have the deck list down below in the description, mainly so that you could check out the whole entire deck. It's all completely only Lord of the Rings cards. I try to make it as synergistic as possible, making it a good competitive deck. I don't think it's going to be quite CDH or even high power, but it's a good casual deck, especially if you want to have only Lord of the Rings cards in them. So with the good guys out of the way, I did also want to talk about the bad guys of the Lord of the Rings universe. Of course, we're going to go with none other than Sauron the Dark Lord. This is absolutely incredible commander. In my top 10 list in the Lord of the Rings set, I did have Aragorn as number 2, but I actually had Sauron the Dark Lord as number 1. Spoiler alert if you haven't watched that video. I honestly personally think Sauron the Dark Lord is super busted. A lot of people are a little bit down on him, but honestly, he has such amazing abilities. He does have wards, sacrifice a legendary artifact or legendary creature. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, amass Orcs 1. Whenever an army you control deals combat damage to a player, the ring tempts you. Whenever the ring tempts you, you may discard your hand. If you do, you draw 4 cards. So I'll tell you what, everybody, this card is absolutely insane. I love that ability. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you amass Orcs 1. I playtested this here and there with some other games. I got this Orc up to 18-18 off of 1 turn cycle. Somebody was playing a lot of spells, but they didn't realize that I was amassing an Orc army in the process. So you can make a big army with Orcs, or on top of that, you could just sacrifice the Orc army every time it enters the battlefield. You could sacrifice it right away, so when an Orc trigger happens again, you could just keep on sacrificing it to get a lot of value. Also, the Ring Temptation mechanic is actually pretty good in this deck. Probably the best commander for the Ring Temptation, in my honest opinion. Whenever the ring tempts you, you may discard your hand. If you do, you draw 4 cards. 4 cards is nothing to scoff at, especially if you have an empty hand. Or even if you have a big hand, you could discard a big giant creature in the graveyard, and you could use a reanimation spell later on in the game and then put that creature from the graveyard to the battlefield to close out the game. I will say that ward ability is pretty good. People will just use a board wipe just straight up just to remove Sauron himself. That's mainly because they can't fill that clause of sacrificing a legendary artifact or a legendary creature. I will say with the new Lord of the Rings set, there's absolutely a crazy amount of legendary creatures, so it might be easier for the person to remove Sauron if they have a legendary creature on the battlefield. So a couple weeks ago, I did make a high-powered deck with Sauron, but this version is going to be a little bit jankier, of course with all Lord of the Rings cards like Aragorn the Uniter. So that's exactly what I'm going to discuss with you. Some of the cards you may want to put in the deck. Of course, it's going to be a little bit of an orc theme. Also as well, Goblin, and on top of that, of course, Reanimator. This has a lot of different things going for it. That's why I absolutely love Sauron, being a very versatile commander. So with that said, let's talk about the lieutenants of the deck like Mahur, Ugluk, and Gorbag. With Mahur, you put extra 1/1 counters on armies or orcs or goblins you control. Also with Ugluk, whenever another creature you control dies, put a 1/1 counter on Ugluk. If it was a goblin or an orc, you could put 2 1/1 counters on it instead. I will say Gorbag is probably one of the best out of the options. Whenever a goblin or an orc you control deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice it. When you do, you can either draw a card or create a treasure token. So I would say these provide great value, especially Gorbag, giving you card draw or creating treasure token for ramp. So all of these kind of feed into each other when you think about it. I also wanted to discuss some other orcs in the army like Orcish Bowmasters, Moria Marauder, and Orcish Siege Master. So I'm not going to go over Orcish Bowmasters as much. Everybody knows it's going to be so good in the format, especially in CDH. I did want to go over Moria Marauders especially, mainly because it does have double strike. Whenever a goblin or orc you control deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. So this provides that great card draw 4 in red when you're exiling the top card of your library. However, if you have a huge army on the battlefield, Orcish Siege Master is absolutely going to be incredible. It does have trample, and other orcs and goblins you control have trample, like your orc army. Whenever it attacks, you get +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control, like your big army. Also, if your big army of 1818 dies on the battlefield, you could use the Ozolith to keep those counters whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield. If it had counters on it, put those counters on the Ozolith. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith had counters on it, you may move all those counters from the Ozolith onto target creature. Say for example you wanted to buff up Sauron to make him a big giant creature, you could do that as well, swing it for some combat damage. Remember with Sauron, whenever an opponent casts a spell, you amass Orcs 1. You're going to be amassing so much, and if they do die, you can put those counters on the Ozolith so that you can put them on another target creature like Sauron himself. I do feel like the Ozolith is actually going to be a pretty impactful card in the deck if you want to put it in there. Of course though, we have to have Sauron's most faithful servants, the Lord of the Nazgul and the Nazgul themselves. Of course you can have up to 9 Nazgul in your deck, which is perfect and thematic. Honestly, the Lord of the Nazgul is a game finisher by itself. Wraiths you control have protection from Ring Bearers. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you create a 3/3 black Wraith creature token with Menace. Then if you control 9 or more Wraiths you control have base power and toughness 9/9 until end of turn. This legendary is absolutely disgusting and will definitely close out some games. This deck has a decent amount of instant and sorcery spells so that you can churn through your deck, especially with the Lord of the Nazgul. You can make more and more Wraith creature tokens on the battlefield. Also, you can buff up your Wraiths by having Nazgul enter the battlefield left and right. Whenever the ring tempts you, you put a 1/1 counter on each Wraith you control. Say for example you have 5 Wraiths on the battlefield and you get tempted a couple times, you're going to be putting 5 1/1 counters on each creature you control that are Wraiths. Plus again, I have to mention it, the Nazgul are going to be absolutely perfect with the Ozolith, no question about it. I did also want to talk about reanimation a little bit. We do have Sauron the Necromancer, Reanimate, and Extract from Darkness. Sauron I guess is kind of a reanimation spell by its own sense. Whenever Sauron the Necromancer attacks, exile target creature from your graveyard, create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of that card, except it's a 3/3 black Wraith with Menace. At the beginning of your next end step, to exile that token unless Sauron is your ring bearer. So this deck, it's going to be easy for the ring to tempt us left and right, so Sauron the Necromancer could be our ring bearer so that we can keep those Wraiths on the battlefield. Also, I do like Reanimate and Extract from Darkness because if we're throwing big creatures into the graveyard, these are ways where we can put them back onto the battlefield to overwhelm our opponents with big giant scary creatures. And if we dig too greedy, we could find ourselves finding a Balrog of Moria, or the Balrog of Durin's Bane if you're talking about the cards. I do like the Balrog of Moria for the versatility it does have of cycling. When you do cycle the Balrog of Moria, you create 2 treasure tokens, and on top of that you will draw a card because of the cycling ability. It also does have an exciting amount of abilities, trample and haste. Whenever it does die, you may exile it. When you do, for each opponent, exile up to 1 target creature that player controls. If anything else, it's a trample, haste, and an 8/8 body. That's absolutely insane, especially if you reanimate it later. Also, I will say, since we're sacrificing things left and right like our Orc army or some other orcs, we could definitely use the Balrog Durin's Bane, mainly so that we could cast it for cheaper because this spell costs 1 less to cast for each permanent sacrifice this turn, like treasure tokens or orc armies. It also does have haste, it can't be blocked except by legendary creatures, and when it does die, you destroy target artifact or creature an opponent controls. So in most cases, this is going to be a 2-for-1. If somebody blocks it with a bigger creature and they both trade, We could also destroy another artifact or a creature an opponent controls. That's absolutely great value for the Balrog. There's also another insane card with Cavern Horde Dragon. They made a mini Dockside. If Dockside wasn't mini enough, Cavern Horde Dragon is actually pretty good by itself. This spell costs X less, where X is the greatest number of artifacts an opponent controls. It also does have Flying, Trample, and Haste. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you create a treasure token for each artifact that player controls. So I feel like this is referring to dragons and their greed for artifacts, or should I say treasures. Say for example, somebody has a good amount of treasure or artifacts on their battlefield. We could possibly reduce this just to 2 red mana for a 6/6 Flying, Trample, and Haste. And if we do deal combat damage to a player with it, we could replace itself with treasure. I will say this card is kind of climbing in price, so if you want your copy, you probably want to get it now, because honestly it's absolutely incredible. Treasures and dragons just make so much great synergy together. So this card is definitely a great choice for Sauron the Dark Lord, so that we could ramp with more treasure and then get him out faster, because he is 6 mana. That's the only big thing about him that a lot of people are wary about. But I will say this, the 6 mana investment is worth it with Sauron the Dark Lord. He has such an array of abilities. I do think this is the most powerful commander out of the set, with Aragorn being a close second. So with that said, I want to thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on Sauron and also Aragorn together. I will say a lot of people on YouTube and on my Discord have wanted to see a deck full of Lord of the Rings cards only, so that it could be absolutely thematic. That's why today I decided to make 2 different deck techs, because of course one with the good guys and one with the bad guys. I wanted to make sure I got all aspects of the Lord of the Rings set so I could put them on 2 complete decks. However, let me know down below in the comments, what other decks do you feel like would be deserving of a full Lord of the Rings treatment? I decided to go with Sauron and Aragorn because I felt like they're most compelling to me personally. Plus Aragorn does have 4 colors, Sauron does have 3 colors, so there's a lot to fit in those 2 decks. So with that said, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and with that out of the way, thank you for stomping by.